Hello. We have with us Professor Scott Qawalli. He is Associate Professor, Department of Middle East and South Asian Studies, Emory University, United States of America. He is an expert on Qawwali music, and he comes to Hyderabad frequently to research Sufi music. Welcome, Scott Qawalli, to the studio.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. My first question to you is, what made you interested in Sufi music and Qawwali?
Well, Qawwali music is a very attractive kind of music. It's very active. It has a strong beat. It has a very emotional character. So just hearing it the first time, I didn't know very much about Islamic culture or Sufism. I didn't know anything about Urdu or Persian language, but I was attracted to just the musical quality of it. Did
you learn the languages?
Only after hearing Qawwali for the first time. I was a university student in the United States, and the first recording of Qawwali came out in the mass market. This was a recording in the 1990s by Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. And it was done by Peter Gabriel, the famous American world music promoter. So that was a vinyl recording, you know, on a black vinyl disc. Right. And luckily I had a black vinyl disc player, and listening to it, I was just immediately captivated by the sound quality, the rhythmic quality of the music. I had never heard anything like that. I was educated in Western classical music. I had listened to Chinese classical music. I had listened to Indian classical music. But Qawwali was something very new for me.
So tell us about the connection between Hyderabad and Qawwali.
Oh, there's a very deep and very long-standing connection between Hyderabad and Qawwali. Qawwals came down to Hyderabad from Delhi, mostly, in the Chishti Sufi tradition. So wherever Chishti Sufis went, Qawwali music happened. In their gatherings, at the tombs of dead saints who've passed away, people gathered to listen to Qawwali. So especially when there was instability in North India and Delhi, especially after the Independence War, the fall of the Mughal Empire, 1857, many famous musicians and poets gravitated toward Hyderabad. They found patronage, they found an audience, and from that time you have really, really great Qawwal families living and singing in Hyderabad.
In fact, you have written a lot about Qawwali and its connection with Hyderabad. I just want to know, for the sake of everybody, the meaning of the words Qawwali and how is it connected to the word Sufi?
Sure. The word Qawwali actually comes from an Arabic word, qawl. Qawl means a saying, and the Quran uses the word qawl to say those who listen to the saying of the word and take the best that is in it are the people of wisdom. That's a rough translation of the Quranic verse that uses the word qawl. So qawwal is a person who does qawl, who does speaking the words of God or a religious message through poetry and music in a beautiful way, a way that attracts people. And Qawwali is the kind of music that comes from the qawwals. So these three words are interrelated from Arabic, and they're used in Persian and Urdu and other languages. Whatever languages Muslims use, you find these words.
And Sufi, and how is it connected to Sufi?
Oh, well, Sufis were the ones that promoted the use of music as a devotional.
Order, as you said.
Chishti order, other orders as well. Sufis are basically Muslim mystics. You could use the word mystic in English. They're people who believe that God interacts with humanity not only through dogma and through ritual, but through love, through emotion.
Isn't that directly against some of the Muslim doctrines?
No, not directly against them at all. You find different interpretations of Islam, definitely, and the Sufi interpretation is one among many. Okay. But the Sufi interpretation of Islam doesn't go against any of the basic doctrinal teachings. It's rather an interpretation of them, one that puts individual experience of divinity first and foremost. So the issue of love, devotion, selflessness, getting rid of the ego, these are all issues that Sufis take up as not just peripheral to Islam, but central to it. And this is based on the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. He said that if you pray, you should pray as if you're seeing God. Well, how can we see God? How can a person be doing their prayers as if they see God? Well, they have to change their attitude, they have to change their heart. So Sufism is all about techniques of meditation, devotion, love, that train you to see God when you pray.
So it's more of a performance, isn't it? Sufi order does talk about performing your devotion in a way.
Yes, they say not only what you should do, like you should pray, you should fast, you should give alms, you should protect the rights of others, but they also ask how you do it and why you do it.
Okay.
So especially the question of why you do it is important, the question of intention. In Islamic thought and Sufism, this is niyyah. Niyyah is the word for intention. That is, if you pray only to get something from God, that's selfish. Right. If you give charity only to be seen by the community as a generous person and to be admired, that's selfish. If you go on the pilgrimage only to come back and have people admire you and say how great you are, well, that's selfish. So Sufism doesn't focus on the ritual things that you do, it focuses on the intention that you have.
And how is all this related to Qawwali? Could you explain?
Sure. Many Sufis embraced music as a ritual practice or a kind of meditation. It's called sama. Sama in Arabic and Persian and Urdu means listening to music, but listening as a kind of meditation, as a way to purify your heart, create states of love, attraction to God, through beautiful poems, especially love poems. So Qawwali, you could say, is one style of Sufi music. There are many different regional styles. Everywhere where Muslims went, they adapted to the local culture, the local environment, and they created a kind of Sufi music that is suitable for communicating an Islamic message to that community. So Qawwali, you could say, is a particularly Indian or South Asian kind of Sufi music.
And also, could you tell us something more about the performance of Qawwali itself? How the team of Qawwals present their music? Yes,
because Qawwali is always a team endeavor. It's always a group of musicians that are working together. There are the primary singers, usually two, one who specializes in a higher register of voice and one who specializes in a lower register of voice. And they tend to call and respond to each other, to back each other up. And then you have background singers. You have drum players who may play the tabla or the dholak or some combination of these instruments. And you also have people who clap as a kind of percussive accompaniment. So you have singers, you have percussion, and you have a group ensemble. That's what makes Qawwali from a musical point of view.
And there must be amplifiers. As one singer sings, there are several others who sing together.
Yes.
Why?
Well, you have to remember that this is a kind of music that developed first in Baghdad in the 9th century, and then in Afghanistan, where the Chishti Sufis originated in a town called Chisht, which is, was a town in about 11th century Afghanistan. Then they moved here to India, to Rajasthan around Ajmer and to Delhi. So you have to imagine music being performed in a time without microphones, without amplifiers, without electricity.
So there's a lot of pre-modern element to it, isn't it?
Of course, of course.
I think you wrote an essay on how Qawwali has traveled from Baghdad to Hyderabad.
Yes.
Could you tell us more about that?
Well, the arc of that journey is what I described to you. Baghdad is the first reference that we have to Sufis listening to music. This is around the time of Hazrat Junaid. Junaid Baghdadi was a great Sufi, one of the early masters who wrote about Sufism. And we also have recordings in literature that say that he and his circle listened to music. So Baghdad is probably the origin for where Sufis and Muslims first used music for meditation practice. And as the followers of Junaid spread all around the world, especially to Persian-speaking parts of the world, like Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, well, the use of Sufi music changed color, and they began to use poems from Persian language, especially the ghazal, which is a Persian form of love poetry, adapted from Arabic literature, but really perfected by Persian poets. Poets like Rumi, Maulana Rumi, or Maulana Jami, or Hafez from Shiraz. These are great masters of Persian poetry. Their poems were used and sung in Sufi music.
But when Qawwali started to be sung in India, what language was it sung in?
Well, the first recorded person we have, again recorded in history books and Sufi manuals, the first record we have of somebody making something called Qawwali in India was Amir Khusro, the great Sufi disciple of Hazrat Nizamuddin from Delhi. So Hazrat Nizamuddin was a great Chishti teacher in Delhi, and his disciple Amir Khusro was a poet and a musician, and first created a Qawwali ensemble to sing poems for Hazrat Nizamuddin and his Sufi audience in Delhi. The language they used was the local language of Delhi, which was an old form of Hindi. It's known as Hindvi, or Khari Boli, which is the spoken language of the common people of Delhi. And they also wrote poems in Persian, they sang poems in Persian, which was the high cultural language of India at that time. So we have some poems sung in Old Hindi, we have some poems sung in Persian. That's the classic repertoire for Qawwali.
But the body of the Qawwali itself, if we consider it as a poem, in fact you had explained to us in several other occasions that the poem itself has several varieties of languages in it.
Yes. As the poem is performed, the singers specialize in improvisation, and part of the improvisation is not just musical improvisation, it is weaving in different poems that act to amplify a certain symbol or to comment on a certain line. So let's say the performers are singing a poem in Persian. They might weave in other poems in Hindi, or some phrases in Arabic, for instance, that might come from teachings of the Prophet Muhammad himself, in order to make their point more clear, and to translate the meaning from Arabic, which was a scholarly, scriptural language that very few people understood in India, to Persian, which was a court culture of high literature, which some people understood, to Old Hindi, which everybody could understand. So it was a kind of popularization of the Islamic message through music.
What other languages did Qawwali use, apart from Arabic, Persian, and Hindi, as you say?
Yes. Well, as Chishti Sufis moved to different regions in India, they used whatever local language the people understood. So in Rajasthan, we have some poems that are sung in Qawwali that are in Rajasthani dialect. Close to Hindi, but particularly Rajasthani. In parts of the country that are near Lucknow, they use a dialect called Purbi, or Eastern Hindi. So Purbi dialect, you had some Sufis writing poems in Purbi. Also, when Mathura became a big devotional center for Krishna bhakti, Krishna devotion, then some Sufis started to write poetry in the language of Mathura, which was called Braj Bhasha. Most all of the Krishna love poetry, the poetry expressing Radha's love for Krishna, was written in Braj Bhasha. Those poems also can be sung in Qawwali. And here in the Deccan, when Chishti Sufis moved down to this region of Bijapur and Hyderabad and Gulbarga, they began to compose poems in Deccani Urdu, which is a particular form of very early Urdu language. And Chishti Sufis were probably the first ones to use this language to write devotional poetry.
And in fact, I come from Bengal, and Bengal has some very exciting Bengali Qawwalis.
There we go.
And we have Munir here. Munir comes from Kerala, and he has heard several Malayali Qawwalis.
Yes.
There are some local varieties. I think there are several more local varieties to this.
Here in the Telangana region, there may be Telugu language Qawwali. This is a rich repertoire of music in many languages, and it deserves to be studied. There are very few studies that look at these local vernaculars. But it's the real skill of the musicians to connect the local language and poetry and particular geography of the place with, let's say, the higher cultural sphere of Persian poetry, maybe even Islamic theology expressed in Arabic.
But what interests me is, rather it makes me curious, What are these Qawwalis about? What are their themes?
Well, the basic theme is love.
For God?
Well, for God, for the Prophet Muhammad, for Hazrat Ali, who was one of the major followers of the Prophet Muhammad, and for most Sufis, he's considered to be the greatest saint, the first person to receive the mystical message of Muhammad and to realize it himself and pass it on to others. So there are many praise poems for Hazrat Ali. And then after him, many of the great saints. So especially in the Chishti order, there are praise poems for Muinuddin Chishti, Hazrat Gharib Nawaz, who's buried in Ajmer, or for Nizamuddin Awliya, who's buried in Delhi. Or closer to home here in Hyderabad, you have Hazrat Banda Nawaz, Gisu Daraz, who's buried in Gulbarga, just a couple of hours from here. There are special Qawwali songs presented to him. And these are sung in and around his tomb as a kind of tribute to him, an honoring of him, to show the veneration and love that people have for him and his teachings. So the basic emotion for Qawwali is love, sometimes mixed with awe, so a sense of bewilderment and wonder at the workings of God or the elevated teachings of spiritual masters.
Do they tell a story?
Some of them tell a story. There's a very famous poem that many people listen to in Qawwali here in Hyderabad called Sare Lama Khan. Sare Lama Khan is about the Prophet Muhammad's mystical ascension on the night of the Miraj. Yes, the night of the Miraj. And it tells the story of him leaving this world and flying up through heaven on the back of a mystical steed and arriving at the footstool of God and the throne of God, and then maybe even in the presence of God himself. And so that tells a story. But in general, Qawwali presents the ghazal, which is a form of poetry that doesn't tell a story. It simply expresses love and devotion in all of its different forms.
But I have heard some of the Qawwalis where some very popular stories are referred to. For example, in one of the Qawwalis, one of the Bengali Qawwalis, I have heard the Qawwals referring to Radha Krishna love story and then deriving Muhammad's love from there through the poetry. That's a very secular way of doing it.
That can be. The beauty of Qawwali music is that it adapts secular themes or poems to a religious, spiritual intent. And this is the genius of Sufi musicians and poets, is that they could take secular music and to create a religious message through it. And that accounts for its popularity. It's not an elitist form of spiritual music, it's a populist form of spiritual music.
So is that the only purpose, to popularize religion? What other purpose could be there for Qawwali?
Well, there is a bit of a missionary purpose behind it, you might say, that is to spread the message of Islam in a way that's accessible to people. And you have to remember that, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, very few people could read. Even the local language, whether it was Bengali or Urdu, very few people could read. So how did they learn about religion? Not through books. They learned about it through the personal example of people they knew, usually their mother or their grandmother, their father perhaps, or their grandfather, or a spiritual teacher. If they belonged to a Sufi community, they could have a sheikh or a peer who demonstrated to them in practical terms what religion was about, or they learned about it through music and poetry. So most people learned their religion through music and poetry. This was a way of spreading a message. But I wouldn't say that the Qawwals and the Sufis were primarily missionaries in the sense that we think of the term today. They were trying to get people to love deeply and fully, to give up egoistic impulses, to give up their selfish urges.
So let's come back to Hyderabad for a moment.
Sure.
What's the condition of Qawwali now in Hyderabad?
Oh, it's a thriving cultural form here in Hyderabad. Many people love Qawwali so much that they bring Qawwali out of the Dargah, or the Sufi shrine, which is its primary place of performance.
Exactly which Sufi shrine does have Qawwali here?
Many Sufi shrines. Basically at the Urs, which is a celebration of the death anniversary of a saint. And it's known as an Urs because it's seen as a wedding. The word Urs in Arabic originally means wedding. It's seen as the moment of death is a time when that great Sufi master is wedded to God. That is, their soul is released from bondage in this world and goes to join God in a loving embrace, the same way a bride leaves her family house and goes to join the groom. So a lot of Sufi images in Qawwali involve marriage, wedding, the bridal night, the loving embrace, the first glimpse. These are all images that are used in Qawwali.
In fact, we are just discussing that there are some Qawwalis which actually take from wedding music.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Last week when we went to the Yusufian Dargah, in one of the Sufi Dargahs, which present very good Qawwali, we found several listeners going into ecstasy. Can you tell us something more about that? Well, because it seems the performers and the listeners are part of the same team sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I mentioned before, Sufi music is technically known as sama. Sama means listening. So actually the audience that is listening, they're the real artists. The Qawwali singers are really there just to promote a certain atmosphere, to help the listeners to achieve certain states of understanding or states of ecstasy. So the listeners are the real artists in Qawwali music. And one of the responses that people may have is to experience an altered state of consciousness, what we would call trance or ecstasy. In Urdu and Persian and Arabic, this is called vajd. Vajd is the technical term for experiencing a state of awareness or existence in which you are at one with the divine.
Okay.
So that could manifest in various ways, and you were perhaps observing at Yusufain, in the midst of the music, some people having an ecstatic response.
Some people shouting.
You could shout, you could gesture, you could get up and move. Some people get up and spin in a circle. Some people have a kind of a dance step that happens. These are all characteristic responses of vajd or ecstasy.
Well, just picking up from where Rishi left off, as he referred to the ecstasy that Qawwali actually affects. I think Qawwali could be best understood from this perspective as a transformative practice. So could you tell us more on the performative aspects of Qawwali, how Qawwali actually help, or it actually constitutes a kind of a particular kind of sensibility or habitus in those who attend Qawwalis or its performance.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's a musical practice. It's definitely a kind of music, but it's also a spiritual practice. As I said, the audience who doesn't sing is participating in that. And the goal of it is a spiritual transformation. Now, that spiritual transformation may have symptoms, and those symptoms would be the kind of ecstatic utterances or gestures that an outsider can observe. But the more important thing is the interior transformation that's happening. And this is where Qawwali is intimately linked to Sufism, because Sufis have written and lectured and taught about changing states of the heart. In fact, one of the early masters of Sufism, Junaid, who I mentioned before, had called it ilmul qulub, the knowledge or the science of hearts. That is, everything in Sufism is meant to affect a transformation of the heart.
I see.
Leading a person from an egoistic stance where you think of I, me, and mine, as opposed to you, yours, to one of us and we, to finally one of everybody in union. So these are states of transformation, and Sufis have gone on to very subtle explanations of what these states are, including hope, fear, love, selflessness, repentance. Some of them are kind of scary states, like the state of fear, or the state of qabd, which means like being constricted. And some of them are very joyful states, like love, or bast, which means being expanded. So there's a transformation of the heart through these various states. And for Sufi listeners to Qawwali, what they're doing by listening is trying to promote or engineer those transformations of the heart. So one example of a Qawwali poem is a ghazal in Persian, and it's attributed to Usman Haruni, who was the spiritual teacher of Muinuddin Chishti, the great Sufi who's buried in Ajmer. And one couplet of that poem is in Persian, Namidonam ke akhir chun dame didar mi raqsam. Magar nazem ba in zawqi ke pish yar mi raqsam. And a rough translation in English is, I don't know why in every breath I go dancing.
Okay.
But my pride is in the way that I go after my beloved dancing. So somebody listening to this could think, it's a love poem on the level of, romantic love. There's somebody dancing, running after their beloved, just like we see in Hindi films, or that we see on FLU campus, or that we see, in daily life. But somebody else might interpret these images of love in a more spiritual way and know that the word yar, which means friend or beloved or sweetheart, also refers to the Prophet Muhammad and refers to God in Persian poetry. So what beloved is it that this poem is talking about? Somebody that you love as a human being, or the Prophet who you love as a spiritual guide, or is it God who you love? What kind of dancing is it that this poem is describing? Is it the kind of dancing that you see in a Qawwali performance when somebody experiences ecstasy and may get up and spin? Is it the kind of dancing that you see in a disco or a pub? Or is it the kind of dancing that happens in your heart when you experience boundless joy? So these are the different levels of interpretation that one simple couplet could generate for different listeners.
In fact, talking about dances, Bollywood appropriated a lot of Qawwali, isn't it?
Yes, very much.
But that's not proper Qawwali, is it?
Well, this is a debate. There was several decades, actually, where Bollywood films really specialized in presenting Qawwali, and some great Qawwali numbers were presented. Most recently in Jodha Akbar, a film where there's a great scene where the Emperor Akbar is listening to Qawwali, and he himself experiences a flash of light and a change of heart that persuades him.
But was that proper Qawwali?
No. That was Bollywood style, and it adapted many symbols and instruments from other Sufi traditions. That particular song is never played in Qawwali, real Qawwali. That was made up for Bollywood. But they captured something of the essence of the Qawwali sitting and the kind of transformation that it can create in a listener in that film.
So, since Qawwali is about fusion music, has there been a rock Qawwali or a Qawwali rock?
Definitely. There's a famous Pakistani rock band called Junoon, which took some Sufi lyrics and set them to a more rock music tone. And I think now there are many groups in India that are doing the same thing, some in America as well. There are modern Sufi rock music adaptations, but those are not real Qawwali in the sense that they don't have the ritual environment and the spiritual intention that Qawwali music has.
With that, one last word about Qawwali. What do you have to say if we say that's the last word?
The last word on Qawwali is to go and listen to it. Live if you can. Recordings are there if you can't. YouTube is full of Qawwali, some good, some bad. But when you listen to it, again, listen to it with the ears of your heart, not with the ears of your head. That's the advice that Sufi teachers give, that you should open up the senses of your heart and close down the senses of your mind when you listen to Qawwali. Sufis call Qawwali ghazaye ruh, or food for the soul. And that's what it should be. It should feed the parts of your soul that grow on love.
And I hope this program also becomes a food for the soul.
So
thank you, Professor Scott Qawwali, and we end this session here. Thank you.
Thank you both.